Imagine three of the most powerful voices in Black America, each armed with a vision so bold it could change the fate of an entire people. Now, imagine these visions colliding, sparking one of the most intense ideological battles in history. Three men stand at the crossroads of freedom. Booker T. Washington calls for strength in labor and economic independence. W.E.B. Du Bois champions higher education and political power. And Marcus Garvey proclaims a path of Black nationalism and unity in Africa. Each man believes his path is the key. But what if only one could lead the way? And what if the future of millions hung in the balance? The scene opens in the early 1900s, a time of tension and transformation for African Americans. The promise of emancipation had given way to the brutal reality of Jim Crow laws, systemic segregation, and violent suppression. From north to south, Black Americans found themselves living in a land that had promised freedom, but delivered oppression. Amid this turmoil, three towering leaders emerge, each with a different dream for their people, each certain that his vision holds the key to liberation. First, we meet Booker T. Washington, a leader shaped by his experiences in the South, where open defiance of white supremacy could mean death. Washington believes that by fostering economic independence, Black people can rise from poverty and earn respect. He builds the Tuskegee Institute to equip young Black men and women with practical skills, and he champions hard work and patience, believing that if Black people show their economic value, white society will have no choice but to grant them their rights. Then, there is W.E.B. Du Bois, a northern-born intellectual who sees Washington's gradualism as a dangerous compromise. With a Harvard degree and a fierce belief in higher education, Du Bois demands immediate access to civil rights and political representation. He advocates for integration, knowing that Black Americans are as American as anyone else and deserve the full privileges of citizenship. For him, education, political power, and a talented tenth leading the way are essential to overcoming systemic oppression. Finally, we encounter Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican-born activist with a vision unlike any other. Garvey believes that the answer doesn't lie in integration or waiting for white acceptance. He calls for a Black nation in Africa, a homeland where people of African descent can reclaim their roots and thrive on their own terms. Through the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, Garvey promotes Black pride, economic independence, and unity across the African diaspora. His vision resonates deeply with those disillusioned by the struggle for equality in America, offering them hope in the promise of a new, self-sufficient Black nation. Their paths converge and collide, setting the stage for an ideological showdown that will not only split the Black community, but also challenge America itself. These three men, bound by a common goal yet divided by differing visions, are about to engage in a battle of ideals that will forever change the course of history. At the heart of the conflict lies a question that haunts every movement for liberation. What is the best path to freedom? The future of Black America stands at a crossroads, with three divergent paths laid out by three powerful leaders. The first path, championed by Booker T. Washington, is one of quiet resilience. Washington is a pragmatist, having witnessed the brutality of the Jim Crow South. He knows that defiance often ends in bloodshed. Through his philosophy of the Atlanta Compromise, Washington urges Black Americans to focus on vocational skills and economic independence, believing that by mastering trades and building wealth, they can elevate themselves in the eyes of society. Washington sees economic self-reliance as the first step toward dignity and equality. He envisions a gradual path where Black Americans prove their worth through hard work and patience, hoping that eventually, white America will see them as equals. For him, direct confrontation with segregation and white supremacy is too dangerous and too costly. Yet Washington's approach isn't without controversy. His critics argue that this focus on appeasement means accepting second-class citizenship, a position that W.E.B. Du Bois sees as more than just misguided. W.E.B. Du Bois views Washington's philosophy as a dangerous compromise that leads not to liberation, but to a cycle of subservience. For Du Bois, freedom cannot be earned through proof or submission. It is an inherent right. He believes that for Black Americans to claim their rightful place in society, they must demand political representation, civil rights, and access to higher education. Du Bois's vision centers around the idea of a talented tenth, the most educated and capable 10% of the black community, who will lead the way for social progress. Unlike Washington, Du Bois argues that black Americans cannot afford to wait for change. They must seek it through activism, education, and the pursuit of excellence. To him, Washington's approach is an acceptance of inferiority, a strategy that ultimately places the power to grant equality in the hands of white society. Du Bois, who spent years studying at Harvard and engaging with intellectual circles, is confident that black Americans deserve every right afforded to others, right now, and without compromise. Then comes Marcus Garvey, a firebrand with a revolutionary approach that breaks entirely from the American framework. Garvey isn't interested in proving anything to white society, nor does he believe in gradual acceptance. Instead, he dreams of a black nation, a place where people of African descent can flourish free from the confines of white supremacy. For Garvey, the answer is simple. Black Americans must reclaim their heritage and establish a self-sufficient nation in Africa. Through his Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, Garvey promotes black pride, economic independence, and unity among people of African descent. His message is electrifying, especially to those who feel that integration and appeasement are impossible dreams in a society structured to oppress them. Garvey's ideology is rooted in Pan-Africanism, a belief in a global black identity and solidarity, transcending national borders. Yet, Garvey's movement also attracts critics. His message of black nationalism and separatism challenges the very notion of American identity for black people, sparking fierce opposition from leaders like Du Bois, who view Garvey's vision as both impractical and dangerous. The battle begins, a tug-of-war for the soul of black America. As these three visions circulate through communities, the ideological tug-of-war begins. Each leader attracts a following, each one sparking hope, debate, and division. Washington's path promises security, but risks complacency. Du Bois's vision demands equality but invites confrontation. Garvey's dream offers independence but requires separation. In the struggle for black liberation, the stakes could not be higher, and the battle lines have been drawn. The ideological clash between W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey begins as a disagreement, but it quickly spirals into a bitter feud that divides the black community. Their conflicting visions for liberation reflect two vastly different approaches to freedom: integration versus separation, and intellectual advancement versus nationalist pride. As these two visions gather momentum, the divide between them grows deeper, creating a rift that impacts the entire movement for black rights and identity in America. Before the Du Bois-Garvey rivalry takes center stage, Booker T. Washington has already laid out his own approach to black progress. Washington's Atlanta Compromise strategy emphasizes vocational training, economic independence, and practical skills. For him, success begins with proving black Americans' economic value and competence within the existing system, avoiding direct confrontation with white supremacy. Washington's approach gains him powerful allies among white leaders who see his pragmatic stance as non-threatening and cooperative. He also attracts a strong following among working-class black Americans, many of whom see vocational skills and economic stability as attainable goals that could lead to security and self-sufficiency. Through the Tuskegee Institute, Washington is able to train generations of black Americans in the trades, hoping to foster self-reliance and gradual progress within society's established structures. However, critics argue that Washington's approach essentially keeps black Americans in a state of submission. Du Bois is among those who challenge Washington's accommodationist stance, claiming it risks cementing black subservience under the guise of economic progress. Du Bois sees Washington's approach as dangerously complacent and seeks to rally others around a more assertive vision. To counter Washington's influence, Du Bois co-founded the Niagara Movement in 1905, a group that promoted civil rights and refused to accept segregation or second-class citizenship. The Niagara Movement advocates for the education, political empowerment, and legal equality of black Americans. Here, Du Bois lays the foundation for his philosophy of the talented tenth, the belief that the top 10% of the black community, through education and leadership, can elevate the entire race. When the Niagara Movement eventually evolved into the NAACP in 1909, Du Bois became a driving force within the organization. the NAACP works through legal and political channels, pursuing integration, equal rights, and the dismantling of segregation laws. Through the Crisis magazine, Du Bois voices his ideas on civil rights, educational advancement, and political engagement, galvanizing Black intellectuals and progressive whites who support his vision. His following grows, particularly among Black middle-class professionals and intellectuals who are invested in changing the system from within. While Du Bois's NAACP emphasizes integration, Marcus Garvey is building an entirely different movement through the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA. Garvey's call is one of Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism, resonating deeply with those who feel marginalized by society's promises of equality. For Garvey, the solution isn't to integrate into a white-dominated America, it's to establish a self-sustaining Black nation. He believes Black Americans must rediscover their heritage and build a future apart from the institutions and systems that have oppressed them. Garvey's charisma and message of pride electrify Black communities, particularly among working-class individuals who are frustrated by the slow pace of change and the NAACP's perceived elitism. His Back to Africa campaign encourages Black Americans to look to Africa as a homeland, a place where they can control their destiny without interference. Through his stirring speeches and public demonstrations, Garvey inspired thousands to join the UNIA, which quickly became the largest Black-led organization of its time. However, Garvey's bold vision worries other Black leaders, particularly Du Bois, who view Garvey's separatism as impractical and divisive. Garvey's critiques of the NAACP and the middle class spark backlash, especially as his movement grows in popularity and his rhetoric intensifies. As Garvey's movement surges, his conflict with Du Bois escalates into a public feud. Du Bois criticizes Garvey's separatist ideology, seeing it as a step backwards that would only reinforce white supremacist arguments for segregation. In Du Bois' view, Garvey's rhetoric and flamboyant style distract from the real fight for civil rights. He sees Garvey as a demagogue leading his followers toward a fantasy of Black sovereignty that, in his opinion, cannot be realistically achieved in America. Du Bois also criticizes Garvey's showmanship, accusing him of fostering dangerous divisions and of using his following for personal gain. In The Crisis, Du Bois openly critiques Garvey, calling him a Negro agitator whose separatist ideals risk undermining the progress toward integration and equal rights. But Garvey fights back. He counters by calling Du Bois an elitist who speaks only to the Black middle class, a leader out of touch with the real needs of the Black majority. To Garvey, Du Bois' emphasis on higher education and integration relies on a flawed assumption that white America will never truly accept Black people as equals. Garvey argues that integration is a myth, a strategy that keeps Black Americans chained to white society's rules and values. He claims that only complete independence, not assimilation, can lead to real freedom. Their feud becomes more than just a personal rivalry. It's a clash of ideologies that divides Black Americans along class, geographic, and ideological lines. Du Bois' argument: separatism is a step backwards, an indirect surrender to white supremacy. By advocating for a separate Black state, Garvey, in Du Bois' eyes, inadvertently supports the idea that Black Americans do not belong in the United States. Garvey's counter: integration is a mirage, a promise that will never be fully realized. Black people will only be free when they have their own land and their own nation, and no longer have to seek approval or acceptance from white society. As the 1920s progressed, the Garvey-Du Bois feud reached the national stage, with newspapers covering their disputes and speeches and articles capturing the attention of the entire Black community. Their public battle becomes emblematic of the broader debate within Black America. Can equality be achieved through integration? Or is self-determination the only path to true freedom? Pride and belonging. Washington's legacy of economic resilience looms in the background, influencing the movement's perspectives and stirring new debates about what it means to be free in a country built on principles of exclusion. As this ideological tug-of-war continues, the fate of Black America stands at a crossroads, with Du Bois and Garvey both determined to be the ones to lead the way. The ideological conflict between W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey has reached its boiling point, with each leader entrenched in his vision for Black America's future. Their public feud has divided communities, forcing Black Americans to confront a difficult choice. Should they pursue Garvey's dream of an independent black nation? Or should they follow Du Bois's path, demanding civil rights and integration within American society? Their rivalry is more than just a personal clash. It has become a defining moment in the Black liberation movement, symbolizing the painful choices that oppressed people face in their quest for freedom. And as tensions rise, so too does the cost of their division: Garvey's legal troubles and the collapse of his movement. While Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, had soared to prominence with its call for black nationalism, the movement soon finds itself entangled in controversy. Garvey's ambitious plans, including the establishment of the Black Star Line, a shipping company intended to facilitate the return to Africa, attract both passionate supporters and fierce critics. The Black Star Line becomes the center of accusations regarding financial mismanagement and fraud, as some investors claim they were misled about the company's financial stability. These accusations culminate in Garvey's arrest on charges of mail fraud. In 1923, he was convicted and sentenced to prison, dealing a devastating blow to the UNIA and his leadership. Many black leaders, including those within the NAACP, seized this opportunity to publicly distance themselves from Garvey. Du Bois, who had long criticized Garvey's approach, expresses relief at the end of what he saw as a dangerous movement. However, Du Bois's satisfaction is tempered by the knowledge that this conviction further weakens black solidarity. In 1927, Garvey was deported to Jamaica, and his influence in the U.S. effectively ended. Although the UNIA continues without him, Garvey's movement never regains the momentum it once had. Yet, his legacy endures, as his bold message of black pride and self-sufficiency leaves a lasting impact. The seeds of black nationalism he planted continue to inspire future generations, from the civil rights movement to the Black Power movement. As Garvey's influence fades, Du Bois' NAACP gains prominence as the central force in the struggle for civil rights. Under Du Bois's leadership, the NAACP advocates for anti-lynching laws, legal challenges against segregation, and increased political representation for black Americans. Through the crisis, Du Bois reaches a nationwide audience, rallying support for integration and equal rights. However, even as the NAACP's influence grows, a haunting question lingers in Du Bois' mind. Could he and Garvey have achieved more together? Despite their differences, both leaders had shared a vision of black empowerment. Both were dedicated to the cause of liberation, yet their unwillingness to compromise, both with each other and within the broader movement, had ultimately weakened their efforts. In his later years, Du Bois would reflect on this lost opportunity. He recognizes that the split between him and Garvey became emblematic of a painful division within the black community, one that left deep scars and fractured solidarity. Could they have set aside their differences and united under a shared goal of liberation? Or was their clash inevitable, a reflection of the complex and varied experiences of black Americans? Although Garvey and Du Bois ultimately went their separate ways, their combined influence would shape the civil rights and black liberation movements for decades to come. Garvey's message of black pride and his call for a return to Africa left an indelible mark, inspiring figures like Malcolm X, who would carry Garvey's Pan-Africanist ideals into the next generation. Garvey's UNIA and Black Star Line became symbols of self-reliance and independence, rallying cries for a black identity rooted in heritage and autonomy. Meanwhile, Du Bois's commitment to civil rights and integration laid the foundation for the modern civil rights movement, influencing leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., who would continue Du Bois's work of fighting for equal rights within the American system. The NAACP's legal victories, its advocacy for desegregation, and its fight for political representation remain pillars of the civil rights struggle, a testament to Du Bois's belief in the power of education, civic engagement, and unity within the existing framework. Their rift may have symbolized the division within the black community, but it also demonstrated the diverse approaches to liberation that would inform the movement. The rivalry between Du Bois and Garvey forces us to ask difficult questions about freedom, pride, and identity. Questions that continue to resonate today. As their followers reflect on their legacies, a powerful lesson emerges. Perhaps liberation is not bound to one vision alone, but to a multitude of paths that together create a richer, more resilient struggle for justice. The clash between W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey wasn't just a battle of personalities. It was a defining moment in the quest for Black liberation. This ideological struggle forced Black America to confront difficult questions about identity, freedom, and unity. The conflict itself became a turning point, influencing the paths taken by activists, thinkers, and leaders for generations to come. Du Bois's unwavering belief in education, civil rights, and the power of civic engagement laid the foundation for the modern civil rights movement. Through his work with the NAACP, Du Bois helped establish a strategy of using legal channels and political representation to dismantle segregation and gain equal rights. His commitment to integration emphasized that Black Americans, as full citizens, deserved the same opportunities and protections as anyone else. This vision inspired a generation of leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr., whose push for integration and equal rights would carry forward the ideals Du Bois championed. Du Bois's legacy endures in classrooms, courtrooms, and voting booths across the United States. His faith in the transformative power of knowledge, his focus on the talented 10th, and his belief in integration created a blueprint for the civil rights movement, proving that the pursuit of equality could indeed reshape a nation. Garvey's legacy: pride, independence, and Pan-Africanism. Marcus Garvey's message of racial pride, self-sufficiency, and Black nationalism offered an alternative vision, one that resonated with those who were tired of waiting for acceptance within white America. Garvey's emphasis on economic independence and the call for a return to African roots inspired the Black Power movement, and later, the Pan-Africanist ideals championed by leaders like Malcolm X. His vision of a unified Black identity, free from the confines of colonialism and white supremacy, planted the seeds of a global Black consciousness that would ripple across continents and inspire freedom movements worldwide. Garvey's legacy thrives in the spirit of independence, pride, and self-reliance that he instilled in the Black community. His message of empowerment remains a touchstone for activists who recognize the importance of economic control, cultural pride, and global Black identity in the ongoing fight for justice. In the end, both Du Bois and Garvey shared the same ultimate goal: freedom for Black people. Their visions may have diverged, but their shared dream of liberation created a foundation upon which future movements could build. Their battle illustrates a timeless truth: the road to justice can take many forms, and sometimes it is the diversity of approaches that strengthens the journey. As we reflect on their legacies, we see that freedom is not bound to a single ideology or leader. Rather, it is a tapestry woven from different struggles, beliefs, and dreams. And in that tapestry, the voices of W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey continue to echo, reminding us that while the paths to justice may vary, the commitment to liberation remains the same. In the end, it is the journey itself, with all its complexity and conflict, that shapes history. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the powerful and complex rivalry between W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. If you found this story compelling, there's so much more to explore. Stick around and click on the next video that's about to pop up. Every view helps support this channel and makes it possible for me to continue bringing you deep dives into the history, struggles, and visions that shape our world.